Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Southeast Regional Fruit and Vegetable Conference. I'd like to thank everyone for coming to this conference in this virtual format that we've been forced to go to these days. My name is Zach Snipes. I am a county extension agent for Clemson University, and I'm housed in Charleston County, so not too far from Savannah. Today, you're going to be attending the Strawberry Educational Conference. But before I begin, there's a couple housekeeping things that we need to take care of. Pesticide credits and CCA credits will be given during these talks. The pesticide CEU guide can be found under the Event Resources tab. Once you go there, you can look at the list of approved presentations. Some presentations may carry more weight than others. So make sure you're getting the right amount of credit for attending these classes. You can also see the participating states and the number of credits that are be given for attending that class. The credits are only available to registered attendees. So if you may be registered, but maybe you're a spouse or a worker on the farm, unless you registered for the conference, you won't be able to receive those credits. Only people that registered. You can only receive credits through the live event, so you have to watch this live. You can watch these recordings later. However, you will not be granted pesticide credits if you watch it later. So in order to receive your credits, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to sign in and sign out, much like you did when you were in school, if you can go back that far. So you sign in by going to the audience chat box, and you just type your first, your last name, and the state in which you're requesting pesticide credits at the beginning of the talk. And at the end, we're going to remind you, you can do that now. At the end, we're going to remind you to sign out of the audience chat box, same way. First name, last name, and the state in which you're receiving or asking for pesticide credits. You have to do that with every talk that you go to. So you want to make sure you do that with every talk. You only have to do this step right here once, though. You have to complete the pesticide CEU registration. Again, you have to do that one time. The pesticide registration link is on the front cover of the guide. Once you go there, you'll find the pesticide CEU guide on the Event Resources tab under the Media Player. So make sure you go there, and you only have to do that once. These presentations are pre-recorded to hopefully reduce technical difficulty. However, I and the speakers during this webinar will be available to answer your questions that you have, and we're going to do that live. So that part is live. So if you have any questions that pop up during the presentation, just type them in the box. Make sure you press send so we can get to your questions. We'd like to thank our sponsors and exhibitors for this year's format. Even though it looks a little different, it feels a little different, it still takes these guys supporting us in order to put this conference on. So make sure you go visit the virtual trade show, the featured products pavilion. Go support those guys, patronize those folks for being sponsors and exhibitors at this conference. Networking, my favorite thing to do at a conference. Too bad we have to do it hundreds of miles or a few miles apart this year. But we have morning coffee chats. They're going to begin at 8:15 every morning during the conference. And we'll also have evening receptions and networking beginning at 5. So that's a good way to kind of hang out and check in with people, again, from hundreds of miles apart. But the networking is the same. So before I begin, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Gerald Holmes. He is the founding director of the Strawberry Center at Cal Poly State University in San Luis Obispo, California. He got his PhD in plant pathology from UC Riverside. He worked there in California as a cooperative extension farm advisor for 3 years. Once he did that, he decided to make the move east and came to the East Coast. And where he worked at NC State as the extension vegetable pathologist. He held that position for 12 years. He then switched gears and took a job with Valent as a product development manager for a few years, and then he worked there and then became the director of the Strawberry Center in 2014. So we're really lucky to have an old East Coast friend, but a West Coast friend presently. So Dr. Holmes, thanks for agreeing to speak today, and hopefully you'll give us some insight on some strawberry breeding, which is very, very important for today's strawberry grower. So without further ado, Dr. Holmes, take it away.
Greetings. My name is Gerald Holmes. I'm the director of the Strawberry Center located at the California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. It's a pleasure to be with you at the Southeast Regional Fruit and Vegetable Conference. This is a conference that I attended regularly while I was an extension vegetable pathologist at NC State University for 12 years. So it's great to be with you. However, I must admit that it would be far better if we were able to be together in person and socialize and interact one-on-one, but we're making the best of it, aren't we? My topic today is host plant resistance to soil-borne diseases in strawberries. The importance of host plant resistance can hardly be overstated, but we have to first recognize that disease is the exception rather than the norm. Plant pathologists talk about host range, and many plants are actually outside of the host range for a given pathogen, so much so that we don't even talk about this. But we should recognize that there are so many pathogens and so many plants that disease is really the exception rather than the norm. That's important to realize. Host plant resistance is the most important disease control measure used in agriculture. There are many examples of genes conferring resistance, and I'll just mention a few. Powdery mildew resistance in barley, leaf rust resistance in wheat, stripe rust resistance in wheat, and my favorite, powdery and downy mildew resistance in cucumber. Heck, I didn't even know that powdery mildew resistance was something. I thought powdery mildew maybe was just outside the host range of cucumber because I'd never seen powdery mildew in a field of cucumbers. It wasn't until I saw an heirloom variety of cucumber being grown in a greenhouse that I realized that powdery mildew was something resistance was something bred into cucumbers. Then in 2004, many of you probably remember that year is the year that downy mildew broke out in cucumbers. So the resistance that had been bred in actually broke down, or there was a new pathotype that came in. I don't even think we know yet which of those things occurred, but it doesn't matter. The point is that disease resistance is an important means of controlling diseases. So in strawberries, host plant resistance is relatively underdeveloped. Why would that be? I think the main reason is because fumigation was the most effective way of controlling soil-borne diseases. And that really replaced breeding as a means of control. And you can't really blame breeders. They're trying to get to their goal as fast as possible. And if some other means is available to control soil-borne disease, why waste your resources doing that? So they were allowed to focus on other important traits. Also, changes in fumigation. If you're in agriculture, unless you've been living in a cave, you know that methyl bromide, a very important soil fumigant, has been phased out at the end of 2016, is no longer used in fruit production fields and strawberries. However, there are other fumigants that are still being used, and some of them being used even more than before because of the phase out of methyl bromide. But these are being used in the presence of increasing regulation. And this is happening so much so that the California strawberry industry is doing all it can to find solutions so that we can farm strawberries without fumigants of any kind. So these were the conditions under which the Strawberry Center was formed, and we had to ask ourselves a very important question in 2014. What can we do under the current circumstances to help with controlling soil-borne diseases? Our first year's experiment was a fumigation and cultivar experiment just to get our feet wet. Here you see an acre of strawberries grown on the farm at Cal Poly. And this acre was divided up into quadrants, and each one of these quadrants had a different fumigation treatment applied. And then within each of the fumigation treatments, you see here the blocks of 4 cultivars replicated 4 times. These are the 4 cultivars that we used: Albion, San Andreas, Monterey, and Portola. These are all University of California varieties. And it just so happened, and we did not plan this, but it just so happened that we had very high levels of verticillium wilt in this field, and that it also just so happened that the 4 cultivars that we had selected kind of ran the spectrum from susceptible to resistant. Here in the lower left, you have Portola, very highly susceptible to verticillium wilt. Monterey was next, and then San Andreas a little more resistant, and then finally Albion was the most resistant of the 4. So we started a host resistance screening program that addresses the following, all of the major soil-borne diseases, and these are the major ones that we deal with: verticillium wilt, charcoal rot, fusarium wilt, anthracnose, and Phytophthora. And we've spent most of our time on verticillium and macrophomina, a little bit less on fusarium and anthracnose, and very little on Phytophthora. We don't get the same level of Phytophthora that you might because of our dry climate and lack of rain. So this is what the disease looked like that first year with 90 genotypes evaluated against verticillium wilt. And this is what the results were at the end of the year, looking at plant mortality. So here is the percent mortality on our vertical axis, and over here at the bottom are all the different cultivars that we evaluated, cultivars and elite breeding lines. Anything with a name like Festival, that's a Florida variety, we have the name Ruby June, Sabrina, etc., Monterey. Those are all cultivars. And then many other things here like UC20, DR5. UC20 would be an elite line from the University of California program, and DR5 would be an elite breeding line from Driscoll's. So that's the plant mortality, and you can see that it ranges everything from 0 all the way up to 78% mortality. That's quite a span. And so this is information that growers can use to select varieties, and breeding programs can use to help direct their breeding efforts. We also did this for macrophomina. We got another field started, and in this case we actually fumigated the field with methyl bromide to make sure that we didn't have any starting point with pathogens. This field had never had strawberries in it. Neither one of them had. And this field didn't have any previous vegetable crops either, so we didn't expect it to have any strawberry pathogens or vegetable soil-borne pathogens. We put 90 genotypes out here, and in this case we had to actually inoculate. The cultivars to elite lines were at about a 1-to-2 ratio. So 1/3 cultivars, 2/3 elite lines. And we replicated this 4 times. At 14 days after planting, we introduced inoculum at the crown of the plant to make sure that we had disease. And this is what the results from that experiment are. Again, you see down here the left-hand side, you see the elite breeding lines, and it goes anywhere from 2.5 all the way up to 96% mortality. That's quite a range. This is the same information by breeding program. So you can see, for example, University of California in red. That's these cultivars here. You can see Driscoll's cultivars here in blue, etc. So you can see that each breeding line had things at the low end and at the high end, and some had very good resistance. So again, breeding programs and growers can use this information to help them select cultivars of greatest value. The fusarium work, we weren't able to screen as many cultivars, but we did screen about 15. This is another location in Watsonville. You can see here Ventana looks quite resistant, whereas Sweet Ann looks quite susceptible. Here's a close-up of Monterey on the left, quite susceptible, and Portola on the right, quite resistant. So looking at all the varieties that we had, in this case, we had no elite breeding lines, only varieties. You can see there Monterey at 75% mortality and Albion at 53, just to give you an idea of the difference in susceptibility of some of the more popular cultivars. But they do range greatly all the way from almost nothing in Petaluma all the way up to Sweet Ann at almost 100%. So these are not small differences. So let's take a look at how our soil-borne diseases differ between the Southeast and California. First off, verticillium wilt, you don't have it, we do. Fusarium wilt, we have it, you have very little of it. Macrophthalmina charcoal rot, we both share. Phytophthora, we both share, although I think California would have less just because of our dry climate, as I mentioned earlier. Anthracnose, we see much less frequently than you do in the Southeast. And then this new one, Neopestalotiopsis, we have not seen it in California, but it is an issue in the Southeast. Now let's take a look at the popular cultivars grown in California, for example. Proprietary is what we call the varieties that are not disclosed. They have intellectual property associated with them. They're private, owned by private companies. And then things like Monterey are University of California varieties. They're public varieties. Proprietary varieties are slightly increasing in acreage. Monterey is slightly increasing in acreage. Frontera is increasing quite a bit. It's a new variety. San Andreas is declining in acreage. Cabrillo is on its way up. It's a new cultivar or variety. Albion is on its way down. Portola is on its way up. Ventana is flat. Petaluma is going down in acreage, and so is Sweet Ann. Now let's look at those popular cultivars of the fall planted crop versus the summer planted crop. In summer planted, you've got Portola is now very dominant compared to the proprietary. There's a little bit of Monterey, a little bit of Cabrillo, and a little bit of other varieties. The Portola is considered an extreme day neutral variety. It can be planted in May or June, and despite the long days, it can get up and produce fruit. And that's a very special attribute of the extreme day neutral varieties. In the fall planted, these are the ones that are planted October, November, and harvested in the spring. There's 26,870 acres, or 76% of the acreage. In the summer planted, that's the ones that are planted in May and June, about 8,500 acres, or 24% of the acreage. The summer planted acres are on slightly increasing. These are plants that are harvested during the winter months where the lowest supply of strawberries is. And the fall planted is slightly decreasing. In Florida, the variety situation is not as diverse. You've got 55% of the acreage planted to Florida Brilliance and 35% planted to Sensation, and another 10% planted to proprietary cultivars. I appreciate Vance Whitaker, the breeder at University of Florida, for providing this information. This is a slide that was loaned to me by Dr. Natalia Perez at University of Florida, and you can see here the two varieties that dominate the Florida strawberry industry and their various disease resistances, and you can see how they're quite different from one variety to the next. Now we're just focusing on the soil-borne diseases, so pay special attention to these three rows: charcoal rot, anthracnose, and Phytophthora. So I went out and asked Dr. Guido Schnabel for input on commonly grown varieties in the Southeast. And in his state, South Carolina, you see the following varieties, and several of these are public varieties such as Camarosa, Camino Real, Albion, and Monterey. Now you can take these because they're public varieties. I'll show you how to build this table in just a moment. But you can look here at the across the top of this table, you have the diseases, and then in each of the columns you have the disease resistance scores. So in this case, all 4 of these varieties are ultra susceptible to macrofomina. This is the resistance scores here, 4 being highly susceptible. So now I'll show you where to get that information. You go to the Cal Poly Strawberry Center webpage where you can get information like this. Okay, so there's your the website. If you click on our work, you'll see field day information and handouts, and click on that and you can see the various field days each year. In 2020, we had a virtual field day, so you can either watch the video or get the handouts either way. This is one of our graduate students, Omar Gonzalez, giving his presentation. You can also select the handout and get a PDF showing, in this case, susceptibility to anthracnose. And I didn't go through that in the earlier slides, but the information is there. In 2019, you can go to macrofomina, for example, and this year we did 83 cultivars. You can see it ranked lowest to highest, or you can go to the next page where you see it grouped by variety, by breeding program. So that's the Cal Poly Strawberry Center webpage. The other webpage you can go to is the Strawberry Commission's webpage. And you can see that you can look at calstrawberry.com, go under pest management, look at breeding, and under breeding, there's a lot of information here. For example, you can go to the day neutral report for 2018. You can see the University of California, Davis information about cultivar yield, timing, size of the fruit, etc. And at the very bottom of that handout, you'll see the disease resistance scores. So those are the day neutrals. Now, going to that table that I mentioned earlier, this is how you would build that table. There's the scores 1 through 4, and those are the 4 diseases and the varieties. Now, this is just public varieties, day neutrality, and then you can select over here on the left, you can select only the day neutrals, only the short days, or only the extreme day neutral, and just get that list of varieties or cultivars. You can also go one by one. Say you want to just look at Monterey or Portola and just compare those two. Maybe you want to add the newly released UC cultivars, these 5 cultivars. Now you can just see those in relation to current cultivars that you're interested in. You can sort these alphabetically by variety. You can sort it numerically, high to low or low to high on any of these columns. So that's a very powerful feature. You can select all the varieties and sort them. So this is a very useful thing, and I hope that you'll take advantage of this. Remember that it's only of value for the University of California varieties, and you can get that at the Strawberry Commission's website. So in conclusion, what you want to do is identify the soil-borne pathogens in your field first and foremost. And then before ordering plants, know the soil-borne resistance of the cultivars you're selecting. And you can get that information at the Strawberry Commission for the UC Davis sites. You can go to our Cal Poly Strawberry Center website for current results from our experiments. University of Florida also has good information on their varieties. And then once you do that, integrate that host resistance into all of the other effective disease management practices that go into a good IPM program. That's easier said than done, but I think that's the way we ought to go about this. Any questions?